What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Undiscovered Games video podcast, where we take a look at the lesser-known board games of the world and share those with you. For episode 68, we're going all the way back to 1992 with a very old-school German board game. This is called Der Fliegende Holländer, which means the Flying Dutchman, and that is represented by this black ghost ship here, which will move around the board and absolutely destroy players throughout the game. This game is very punishing, and it's kind of funny if you can laugh at that type of thing, but it's also very frustrating, and this is not a game for everyone, so proceed with caution. Watch through the video before you rush out and buy this so you can learn what I like and dislike about the game, but this is definitely one worth featuring on this channel, especially because it's by the late great Klaus Teuber. He is most well known for his very popular game, Settlers of Catan, but this one came 3 years before Catan, again from 1992. This was illustrated by one of my favorite artists, Franz Wrinkles. So you can see the great art on this game board. I love how it looks like an old crinkled up map. Very cool aesthetics when this is on the table. But to sum up the game, each player is holding some secret share cards in various colors, and then each round this black ghost ship will move one space around the map. Whatever color it lands on, it will punish those players holding that color, but what's interesting is the players completely control where that ghost ship moves. So it's a player-driven game. There's a little bit of negotiation that happens. You can secretly bid for control over that ship, and if you tie with other players, you have to work out a deal with them as to where that ship will move. And you're going to run out of these little bidding tokens, so you have to take some turns replenishing your supply. There's a closed economy of these bidding tokens. Lots of unique, interesting stuff going on here, especially for a game that came out in 1992. This episode was voted on by the channel members, so big shout out to all the UGOGs who directly support this channel to help keep it alive. If you'd like to become a member and vote on future episodes, get early access to all my videos, and watch every third episode, which is for members only, you can look for that join button below the video or in the video description. It's less than the cost of a board game to support this channel for an entire year to help continue my work of finding and sharing lesser known games while updating the video archives on a lot of these old and forgotten games that just don't have any videos. So that's my whole mission here. If you want to be a part of that, check the video description below for more info. And if you don't want to join yet, that's totally fine. Just make sure you do click subscribe right here on YouTube at undiscovered_games to learn more about lesser known board games. All right, let's take a deeper look at Klaus Teuber's The Flying Dutchman. To set up the game, place the board in the center, make a money supply somewhere near the board, and then place this black ship on the Holland island shown here. Find these 6 colorful cylinders and the 1 black marker. These all start on the number 2 treasure chest of this track. Now give each player their starting money of 25 ducats from the bank. You also give each player 3 Schmied cards, they look like this, and 3 Kontor cards, they look like this. Any leftovers go back in the box. Next, you have to prepare the share deck, or the ship deck. These ships will be in 6 different colors. We have red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. And you have to use a certain number of these depending on the player count. You will always have all 6 colors in the game, but it's player count -1 per color. So in a 4-player game, you will use 3 cards per color. Put the rest back in the box. Now take this deck of 18 cards here in a 4-player game and shuffle these together, dealing 3 face down to each player. And it's important to keep those cards hidden from your opponents. Give each player a tile rack, and you're going to mix all these horseshoe tokens face down or in a bag or something, and give 9 to each player at random. Each player keeps these hidden from their opponents. You can put these in your little plastic rack like this. Now you'll have some horseshoes left over. Out of that supply, place 1 per player face down in the center of the board. So in a 4-player game, we will choose 4 of these to put in the center of the board without looking at them. Any leftover horseshoe tokens go back in the box. They will not be needed for the game, and you do not look at those either. Now you just need to determine a start player however you see fit, and give the start player these 2 wooden dice. And now you're all set up and ready to play. Now, before I teach you the rules, I want to give you a brief overview of the game structure. It's very simple. Play is always clockwise, starting with the start player. And at the beginning of each round, the start player will roll these 2 dice. That will determine the lucky number for the round, and I'll explain that here in a moment. Once you determine the lucky number, the start player will choose 1 action. Then each player, in clockwise order, will take turns choosing 1 action at a time. Once every player has done 1 action, that ends the round. Then these 2 dice pass clockwise to the next player, and they will become the start player for the next round. They will begin the next round by rolling those 2 dice, and then each player in clockwise order chooses 1 action. Once everybody chooses their 1 action, then you move the dice to the next player, and they become the start player, and so on. The game will continue like this until this black marker hits the number 18 treasure chest on this chart. Once that happens, that will be the final round of the game, and then we will tally up our final scores. So this black marker is sort of a game timer. The whole goal of the game is to end with the most money. You'll have some opportunities throughout the game to make or lose money, but then you'll also get money at the end of the game based on your final 3 ship cards. These colorful cylinders will track the value of each ship color throughout the game, and at the end you'll get paid according to that chart. So if the game ended like this and I had 2 blue ships and 1 red ship, that would be worth an additional 31 ducats from the bank because the blue cylinder is on the 13 and the red cylinder is on the 5. So 13 plus 13 plus 5. That 31 ducats gets added to my money that I made throughout the game, and that's my final score. So now that you have a basic understanding of the structure of the game as well as your goal, now I can really dive into the rules and you'll start to see how this thing works. So at the beginning of the round, like I said, the start player will roll these 2 dice. Let's say they roll a 37. That is the lucky number for this round. Now the start player chooses 1 action. You have 3 possible actions to choose from, and they're very simple. You can either play a Kontor card, play a Schmied card, or play horseshoe tokens from your rack. So let me go into these in detail. If you play a Kontor card, then you immediately take 2 ship cards from the top of this deck, and then you can discard any 2 from your hand back to the bottom of this deck. So this is a way to reposition yourself with different share colors. After you play your Kontor card, you just place it on a face-up discard pile right here, and that's removed from the game. Remember, you only have 3 Kontor cards to last you the whole game, so you have to decide those right moments to swap out for new shares. If you play a Schmied card, it stays face-up in front of you until the end of the round. At that point, any players who played Schmied cards get to split all the horseshoes that are in the center of the board. Remember, we placed 4 at random to set up the game, but as the game builds, more and more horseshoes will be building up in the center as players play them off their racks, and that's the 3rd action choice, which I'll get into here in a minute. Anyway, if you can't distribute these horseshoe tokens evenly, then any remainders just stay in the middle of the board for the next round. And that's how the Schmied card works. This one is really important to play at the right moment, especially regarding the clockwise turn order. If you play a Schmied card early in turn order, then other players have a chance to also play a Schmied card and cut down on your share of those horseshoes. However, if you're last in turn order and nobody has played a Schmied card yet, you can play your Schmied and get all the horseshoes in the middle. So you have to keep an eye on where you are in turn order. You only get 3 Schmied cards to last you the whole game, and once you play one, it's discarded and you do not get it back. So why do you need these horseshoe tokens? Well, this is your 3rd and final action, and this will bring everything together. This is like the whole point of the game. If you choose to play horseshoe tokens, you play them face down in front of you, and it's sort of like a secret bid of sorts to hopefully move this black ship. Now, when you play horseshoes, you're allowed a maximum of 1 golden horseshoe and then as many white horseshoes with it as you want. You could just play only white horseshoes as well, but you can never play more than 1 golden horseshoe. You're trying to get as close to the lucky number as possible without going over. Notice how the white numbers can be plus or minus, but the gold numbers are just straight numbers. So in this example, again, the lucky number is 37. I could bid my golden 28, a white plus 10, and a white minus 1, and that puts me right at 37. So again, these tokens go face down, and my opponents can only see that I've bid 3 tokens. They don't know how close I got to this number. I do not reveal these horseshoes until everyone has taken their one action. At the end of that, anybody who played horseshoe tokens will reveal them, and whoever got closest to the lucky number without going over gets to move this ship one space. This ship will move along these lines according to the map, and it can only move one space adjacent. Also, it can never move back to the same space it was on the previous round. So if the ship was here and it moved one space here, what we like to do is put this little pirate coin on that space to remind us that the ship cannot go back to this space this round. Then when it moves again, we'll put the pirate coin there and it can't move back to the pirate coin. So that just adds a little visual aid to, show everybody where the ship can and can't move. So again, whoever had the horseshoe value closest to the lucky number without going over has full control over where this ship moves. However, most of the time, one player does not get to decide this because there will be multiple players submitting their bids with their horseshoes, and there will be lots of ties. So if multiple players tie with their horseshoes, then those tied players have to come to a unanimous agreement as to where that black ship can move. And I'll get into that negotiation thing in the next segment of the video. First, I want to talk about what happens when the black ship moves. Now let me set up a quick example here. It's much easier to visualize how this works. Let's say the board is set up like this. The ghost ship is sitting here on this blue ship, and the pirate token is here to remind us that we cannot move the ghost ship here because that's where it was last round. So from this blue ship, it can only move up to the purple, over to the red, or over to the island. Let's say for whatever reason, the players decide to move the ghost ship onto the red. Move this pirate coin up to remind us that it can't move back here next round. Now, as soon as this lands on a color ship, everybody holding that color gets punished. So here, anybody holding red ship cards in their hand have to reveal all of them. And any red ship card you're holding, you have to pay to the bank its current value according to this chart. So here you can see the red cylinder is sitting on the number 7 treasure chest. So anybody holding red ship cards has to pay 7 ducats to the bank per red ship card that they're holding. If a player doesn't have enough money to pay that cost, they're just eliminated from the game completely. So you just instantly lose if you can't make that payment. But the punishment does not end there. Furthermore, after the players pay that cost, the red value tanks to the bottom of this chart. So this cylinder goes all the way down to the 0 treasure chest. So you might be starting to see why it's very important to have horseshoe tokens so you have control over moving that ghost ship. And I'll get into all that. Stick with me here. So no matter what color the ghost ship lands on, that same process plays out. Everybody shows all their shares of that color. They have to pay their current value to the bank, and then that color goes down to the 0 on the treasure chart. After you do all that, every color cylinder moves up 1 notch on this treasure chart, even the one that just tanked to the bottom. So you take all these cylinders and move them up 1 space here. You also move the black stone up 1 notch. Again, the black stone is just a game timer, so this will never move backwards. This always moves up 1 whenever the ghost ship hits another ship. Now, what happens when the ghost ship lands on an island? Let's go back to our previous example so I can show you this. Let's say the players decided to move the ghost ship here instead. Now it lands on an island. At this point, any players who were involved in moving the ghost ship, so only the players that matched that lucky number or got close to it, they got to move the ship onto the island. They get to immediately show one of their share cards from their hand and get paid from the bank according to its current value. So let's say I was involved in moving this ghost ship. I moved it onto the island. I now look at this chart of the colors I have in my hand. Yellow is the most valuable at 11, so I show one of my yellows, and now I get paid 11 ducats from the bank. And then this card just goes back in my hand. It's worth noting I do not have to show my highest value. Maybe I don't want my opponents to know what colors I have, so maybe I show a lower value just to, throw them off a little bit. But whatever one I show, I take that value from the bank. And it's also worth noting that when the ghost ship lands on an island, you do not do anything with this price chart over here. So all these cylinders stay right where they are, and you do not move the black marker up either. So the ghost ship is either going to move onto an island and pay the players who moved it there, or it will move onto a ship of a certain color and destroy that color's value. Regardless, that's the end of the round after the ghost ship moves. At this point, all the horseshoe tokens that were played get placed in the center of the board, and those form the pool for the next round of the game. So anybody who plays Schmied cards in the next round will get a share of those horseshoe tokens. And again, you keep those tokens face down in the middle. Then you just pass these dice one space clockwise, and that player will be the start player for the next round. They begin the next round by rolling the dice to determine the lucky number. Then each player, starting with the start player, takes one of those 3 possible actions. And you just keep doing that. Once that black stone hits the 18 treasure chest, that will be the final round of the game. Finish that round and then tally up your scores. Again, your final score is the money you have left over in your supply, plus the final value of your 3 ship cards at the end of the game. Add those together, the player with the most money is the winner. Now there's one more thing to discuss, and it's the all-important negotiation phase that happens when multiple players submit horseshoe tokens and they are tied, either matching that lucky number exactly or being equally close to it without going over. Whenever there's a tie for submitting those bids, those players have to come to an agreement as to where that ghost ship will move. So let me show you how this works in an example. Let's say the board is set up like this, and all 4 players played horseshoe tokens face down on their turns. At this point, all players reveal their bids. The lucky number here is 33. As you can see, this player played a 29, this player played a 31, this player played a 31, and this player also played a 31. So these 3 players all got equally close to that lucky number without going over. This player who played the 29 is out of luck, so they have no say in where the ghost ship moves, and they lose these horseshoe tokens. So that's brutal for this player. But these 3 players now have to come to an agreement on moving the ship. This happens in clockwise order. The players take turns saying where they want the ghost ship to move. So this player might say, I want it to move here. And then this player says, no, I want it to move over here. And then the third player says, I want it to move over here also. This is not a majority rules thing. You have to have a unanimous decision among all the players moving the ship. So here, one player wants it to move here. The other 2 want it to move over here. Now those 3 players have to negotiate with each other on where that ship is going to move. And you're allowed to, bribe each other with your money here. However, if the players cannot come to a unanimous agreement as to where that ship will move, then they are forced to bid again with more horseshoe tokens. And then you resolve that bid the same way. So the closest to the lucky number without going over gets to move the ship. But then you've lost all those horseshoe tokens from your first bid and your second bid. If that second bid is still tied, you go again. And in the rare case that neither player can submit more horseshoe tokens, then it just comes down to a die roll, and whoever rolls the highest number gets to move the ghost ship. And I've never seen that happen in any of our games. Usually players can come to an agreement with money because they know that horseshoe tokens are very valuable. You have to maintain control over that ghost ship, and the only way to do that is to have horseshoe tokens. Now, I'll talk more about the negotiation in my review because I really like that part of the game, and there are some ways you can use it strategically to your advantage, especially regarding the turn order. But before I do that, I want to talk about a couple more little rules to keep in mind. First of all, you're never allowed to pass your turn, so you have to choose one of those 3 actions. However, if you have fewer than 5 horseshoe tiles on your rack, you are allowed to pass and just do nothing. But that's the only time you're allowed to do that. Otherwise, you have to play a card or play horseshoes when it's your turn. Another rule that's not clear in the rulebook is if nobody decides to play horseshoe tokens, does the ghost ship move? I could not find official clarification on this. I don't think it's that big a deal because it doesn't happen that often, especially because if you're last in turn order and nobody's played any horseshoe tokens yet, it's in your best interest usually to just throw 1 horseshoe token down. That will guarantee that you get to move the ship. So usually, the last player in turn order will jump on that opportunity. But in the rare case that nobody plays horseshoe tokens, we've been playing the game where the ghost ship just stays put, no values go up or down, and you just move on to a new round as if nothing happened. So that's been working fine for us. Like I said, it does not happen very often, but that's one little rules wrinkle that I could not find for sure. And if you have any insight on that, drop it in the comments below. I'd love to read about it. So I think I covered all the rules to this game. If I missed anything or if I need to clarify anything, I always put that in the rules clarification section of the video description. So make sure you check that out while you're watching the video. I also tried to pin a comment below as well to make it a little easier to find. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I'd be happy to clarify anything or try to answer them to the best of my ability. But for now, we're going to get into my rating and review. Okay, so I don't know where to begin with this, but this is one of those games where when you read the rulebook, it does not prepare you for what's about to happen when you actually play the game. It's one of those games you just have to experience to see all the little nuances and subtleties and tension that exists throughout the game, especially toward the end. Those colors creep up in value, and later in the game, the stakes are so high on certain colors, and those colors are like public enemy number one from all the players trying to destroy those high-paying colors. It gets very, very tense toward the end of the game. So because of that, you have to pace yourself. And again, it takes a couple games to figure that out. You cannot run out of horseshoe tokens. You have to try to maintain control of that ghost ship, but sometimes you just can't. And it's very frustrating. It's very punishing. And it's a very mean game as all the players are trying to, destroy each other all the time. There are not many shared incentives that exist in this game, except if you know your opponent is holding the same color as you, maybe you can agree to move the ship to a shared location. But even when that happens, it's not always in your best interest to be agreeable in those negotiations, because that's how you can extract money from people, especially if you're sitting later in turn order. And I would say throughout this game, the last player in clockwise turn order tends to have an advantage, and that balances out over the course of the game because the turn order is always changing. But I'm just saying there's definitely an advantage to going last because you can wait and see what the other players do. Also, playing those Schmied cards. If you're trying to play the Schmied cards and get the horseshoe tokens in the middle, then again, playing that early in turn order is kind of risky because the other players are going to look and be like, I don't want that player to get all those horseshoe tokens, so I have to play my Schmied card and cut them out. So much player interaction here. I mean, this is peak level player interaction. It kind of reminds me of that game Merchants of the Middle Ages that I covered last year on the channel, except that one's a lot more complex and slow moving, whereas Der Fliegende Holländer is very streamlined and more focused and a simpler game overall from a complexity standpoint. I will say that this game, does not run long at all. It's like 60 minutes tops, and that's perfect for a game like this. Even when we play with 5 players, it does not overstay its welcome. So that's a selling point. I will say each round can feel a little repetitive. Round after round, it's kind of the same story. The black ship is going to move one space. Where's it going to go this time? Now, it is in your best interest to pay attention to where it can move after it moves. So you're not just focused on this round, you're looking later at the map. It's like, okay, it can move here this time, but then next turn, it could utterly destroy me. So maybe I don't want to move it to that spot this round. So you do have to do some forward thinking in that regard, but the game is kind of weird to me because you're never accumulating more shares as the game builds. You always have 3 shares, and you're just trying to pace yourself and time it just right so that when the game ends, you have the most valuable 3 shares. And that's tricky to do, but it also feels like it does lack a little bit of a progression, as the game builds. I feel like the only source of rising tension that exists here is the result of certain colors, creeping up in value toward the end of the game. And that definitely creates some tense moments because the more valuable those colors get, the more that puts a target on those colors for players to either attack them and destroy those colors or protect them at all costs if they're holding on to those colors. And, players will pay out a large amount in negotiations to protect their colors near the end of the game. So you have to use those negotiations to your advantage. And the more you play the game, the better you'll get at recognizing that stuff. But that's what I'm saying. That stuff does not come through in the rulebook whatsoever. You have to experience the game, and I think you'll see what I mean. And another thing that does not come through when you just read the rules are all the mind games that happen here. Think about when the boat is about to move onto an island. Sometimes you can use that to your advantage and bank on your opponents wanting to move that ship. Maybe that's the time to sneak a Schmied card in and get a bunch of horseshoe tokens because your opponents are going to want to move that ship to the island to get paid. No, you won't get a payout, but you'll set yourself up for future turns, and you have to look for those little opportunities to get a leg up. And like I mentioned earlier, when you're negotiating with your opponents, it's not always best to agree with them. You've got to play some mind games during that negotiation. If 2 players ahead of you agree to move the ship to yellow and you secretly also want it to move to yellow, maybe you shouldn't say, okay, let's move it to yellow. Maybe instead you should be like, no, I would rather move it over here to red. And then all of a sudden you have to negotiate. And maybe they'll be like, well, we'll pay you $5 if you agree to move it to yellow. And then it's like, okay, we can move it to yellow. And secretly you wanted it to move to yellow the whole time. So you can definitely play those types of mind games with your opponents. And like I said, the more you play this, you'll find that the negotiations become a much bigger part of the game as players get more familiar with it. The problem with that is with a negotiation game, it tends to be very group dependent. So if you want that part of the game to come to life, you really have to have the right group sitting at the table that really gets into that part of the game. So again, this is not going to be for everybody in that regard. Another thing I find interesting is you pretty much have to take an action every turn, and this forces you to make a decision when a lot of times you want to wait and see what your opponents are going to do. Again, going last in turn order has a big advantage, but you cannot pass your turn unless you have fewer than 5 horseshoes, and that doesn't happen very often, and when it does, you're probably not in a very good position because you need to keep some horseshoes in your supply. But I just think it's neat that you have to take an action because you only have 3 Schmied cards, you only have 3 Kontor cards, and then the other action is going to be playing horseshoes. So everything is going to deplete you of your, valuable actions, and you have to know when to kind of waste actions and when to take actions. That's a really neat part of the game. And, those Kontor cards, typically players like to hold on to those till later in the game to try to swap for the more valuable colors later in the game. But those Kontor cards can sometimes be used as a pass early in the game. And you can kind of just play that card, draw 2 ship cards just to see what you get, and you can always discard the 2 that you just drew if you didn't like what you got. But that's a way to pass your turn early on, except you waste one of your Kontor cards. But sometimes it makes sense to do that stuff. Again, lots of little subtleties like that don't come through until you sit down and play the game. Even just bidding those horseshoe tokens and putting them out in front of you face down is a mind game in and of itself. You're always guessing, did that player just happen to have the lucky number and they only put 1 token out, or are they just trying to pass their turn by throwing away a single token and just biding their time? Or if a player puts a lot of tokens out, they might have the lucky number exactly, so should I even bid and waste my tokens? Or there's so many great mind games here, and the player interaction and the mind games are really where this game excels, and I love that type of stuff in these old board games. All things considered, I rate this an 8 out of 10. That's a B- on my grading scale. I definitely think it shows its age a little bit in the gameplay. Like I said, it can feel repetitive at times, but at the same time, I can't deny how unique this game is, especially for coming out in 1992. I mean, this really has its own unique identity, and that's what I like the most about it. Obviously, it's similar to some other stock holding commodity speculation games that I've covered, like Banque Fatale or Keops. I rate those games a little higher than this one. However, this one feels like a totally different game because, again, you're not building up shares, you're just trying to time the end game perfectly with the 3 shares that you have. Also, this has that boat moving around the map, and you can kind of, look ahead and see what colors are at risk in the future. It's kind of a neat little spatial element to colors tanking in value for like a stock market type of a game. So really interesting design here from the great Klaus Teuber, and I might even say this is my favorite Klaus Teuber game. I have a few others in my collection, and you'll probably see videos on those in the future. What is your favorite Klaus Teuber game? Have you ever played this one? Does this look like something that would interest you? Let me know all that stuff in the comments below. I would love to read about it, and make sure you're subscribed right here on YouTube at undiscovered_games to learn more about lesser known board games just like this. I play through hundreds of games every year, and not only do I love bringing you my favorite discoveries, but I also like to freshen up the video content on a lot of these old games that never had video content. So that's part of my mission here, is updating the old archives so that other people can research these games and learn about them and decide if they would like to seek them out. If you want to help keep the channel alive, there are lots of ways to help out in the video description below. You can become a channel member for less than $2 a month right here on YouTube. Members get early access to all my videos. They can vote on future episodes, lots of other fun perks, but But most importantly, every third episode is visible to members only. So we're coming up on another members only episode here. You can join now and watch the next episode, as well as all our previous members episodes. We have a lot of fun on those. So members, I will see you in a couple weeks for episode 69, and the rest of you, I'll be back right here a couple weeks after that for episode 70. I got a great top 10 list lined up for episode 70. You do not want to miss that one. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you on the next one.